historians rely most on literary sources, and they fall into two categories. They fall into what's called primary sources and then secondary sources. And primary sources are sources written by the participants of the events that you're studying. So they're documents from the period. You have to be very clear. We don't have any primary literary sources for the life of Muhammad, not one. There is not a single document.
If you don't mind, if I just ask you a question right there, would the Hadith compilations be considered primary sources? I know they were passed on orally for a certain amount of time before they became were written down. But would oral transmission, if we're really able to trace them back to the person who first transmitted, would would something oral be considered a primary source? Or does it have to be something literary and material, or a piece of literature?
No, I mean, it could be that the Hadith are primary sources. I don't see them as such. I see them as secondary sources, like the books of Sirah. And I'll explain my reason why. Let's say that you have a Hadith, and you believe you're an observer of the Prophet saying something. And let's say he tells his son what he heard the Prophet saying. And that person told his son or daughter, and it was passed down, let's say, 20 generations or 15 generations. Because let's say that the average generation at the time of the Prophet's, I don't know, 16 or 18 years. That's from the birth of a child to the time that they then give birth to a child. So let's say it's 20 years. That means there's 5 generations in a century, which means there's 10 generations within 200 years. So that's the length of time we're talking about. And most of the Ahadith collections, you take Bukhari, for example, the most famous collector, he's writing in the mid 800s. So that's a full 220, 230 years after the life of the Prophet. So 10 generations or 11 or 12 generations have already passed. Now you think about that, that's your granddad, your fathers, 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 fathers. I'm not even there yet. That's a very, very, very long time ago for us to believe that no changes occurred in what was transmitted from each of those generations. I'm not a Quranist. I use Hadith quite widely, but because of these issues and because of the nature of Hadith, they're designed to have a normative function to teach behavior to future generations and to serve as the heart of what we call jurisprudence, fiqh. Then if that's their function, they're not designed, obviously, to explain the historical context of their origin. In that sense, they've been detached from that. And the context when the wording was passed down without the context. So you'll have someone say, I heard the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, say to someone that, and then there's the quote. But the Hadith doesn't say, in most cases, what the context was, that he said it at the end of a battle, that he said it after this event or that event. So we don't necessarily have that historical context. So as a source for history, as opposed to a source for law, the Ahadith are of less value, perhaps, than the books of Sirah. As I said, I don't want to disrespect the collections of Ahadith. Some people favor them very highly and prize them as a human activity. But I say this to you. As Muslims, we believe that God has promised in Surat al-Hijr, verse 9, that he will be the protector of the Quran. That's what we believe that verse means. And because of that, we take pride in the fact that the Quran has passed down to us unchanged because of that promise in Quran that God said, I will be its guardian. Show me another book that God has said that he would protect. He didn't say, I'll do it to the books of Sirah. He didn't say, I'll do it to the books of Ahadith. And if we're proud of the Quran and we say it's a miracle, which is the standard Islamic response, it's a very pleasant one, that the Quran is God's miracle because it hasn't been changed, then it's no longer miraculous if we're somehow told that we have to treat a hadith as if they're also inerrant and perfect and unchanged.
Mm.
And so there's a philosophical issue that Muslims reflect on, or should reflect on, when they deal with sources. And again, I repeat, I'm not particularly hostile to a hadith. They have a value, and I use them with the same approach as I approach all sources, which is that we need to be careful. We need to ask questions about those sources, whether the books of Sirah or a hadith. But let me go back to the books of Sirah.